Let's go back to High Speed 2 and our transport correspondent, Richard Westcott. Richard, we're talking about this National Audit Office report, which I suppose is not good news for the High Speed 2 case, but they're not actually saying you shouldn't build it. They're not saying there isn't a case.
No, they're not. They're not saying as well that it won't eventually be value for money. But what they're saying is there's no evidence at the moment, or not enough evidence, to back up the big government claims. If you think about the two big reasons that were always given to build this line effectively, the first one, it's going to rebalance the economy, it's going to move money outside of London and into the regions. When they announced the Y shape of it, the bit that goes up to Leeds and Manchester in January, I interviewed various people, George Osborne, David Cameron, everyone was out and about across the country basically saying, this is going to change Britain. We're like the Victorians, we're ambitious, this is going to rebalance the economy. It basically says it's unclear how it's going to rebalance the economy. They haven't actually backed that up with hard evidence, with numbers, as it were. And it also says they haven't really made the case for needing all this extra capacity. We keep hearing the lines are going to get full very soon and we need this extra capacity. And it's saying they need to prove that.
Just in terms of the numbers, there have been quite a few numbers bandied around. The benefit to cost ratio, if you add up all the benefits and add up all the costs expected, and obviously there's a huge doubts in all of those, just what are the kinds of numbers that we're getting at the moment in terms of how much benefit there is for every pound of cost?
Well, it's, in simple terms, for the bit that goes up to Birmingham, first of all, you basically get £1.40 back for every pound you spend. Now, I remember covering this initially, and that was about £2.60 back for every pound you spend when they first sort of announced the project. Now, they've actually found there were some mistakes in those figures, and they double-counted some of the benefits. So that's been sort of reduced down, it's been reduced up. Frankly, it's been a moving target when you actually try and get the latest BCR. And I know the government don't like to focus on that because they know it moves around and they know it doesn't look great. £1.40 back for every pound you spend isn't the kind of project they would normally go for. That's not a great BCR. So the government are constantly stressing, look, there's much more to this than crunching the numbers. But that is the current BCR for the part that we know about. Well, we know more detail about the route and so on, which is the first bit that goes up to Birmingham.
It is government policy to build High Speed 2. 225-mile-per-hour trains stamping a big Y across the country, up from London to Birmingham, spreading out to Manchester and Leeds. The policy's been chosen, but the case has not been made, according to the National Audit Office. Now, it doesn't come out against High Speed Rail, it just says it's not clear that it's value for money. It calls the 20-year timetable for delivery of HS2 challenging. Well, we'll talk to the Transport Secretary in a moment, but let's get the economic picture from our economics editor, Stephanie Flanders. Stephanie, the claimed benefits. Let's talk about what benefits are claimed for HS2 first.
Well, their arguments, the government's arguments for HS2 have always focused on the economic benefits to customers of increasing capacity and cutting journey times on that very busy West Coast line, and also the broader economic benefits to the Midlands and to the North, which would come from not just building the project, all those jobs, but connecting those parts of the country more tightly to the South East. Ministers talk about it being a fast track to bridging the North-South divide. And as you know, they always do very elaborate cost-benefit analyses for these big projects. And at the moment, the one that the National Audit Office has also looked into is that it says that every pound spent on that first stage of high-speed rail would produce about £1.50 or so in benefits, and the ratio would be quite a lot higher, maybe more than 2 to 1 for the second part. Although, as that report points out, those estimates have changed a lot, and in fact, the benefits of the first one have gone down quite a lot since the project was first announced.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, there's a lot of opposition from people whose lifestyle is going to be affected by this huge thing coming through near their property. But what about the economic arguments against building it?
Well, I mean, if you look at people like CBI, the business group CBI, they're cautiously supportive. But I have to say, Evan, I don't know if you found it different, but I found it quite hard to find an economist who thought it was a great idea. And a lot of their misgivings are in the report today. I mean, one of the big things is people say the gains to business travellers of those shorter journey times have really been exaggerated. And the report points out they're often based on 10-year-old data when we didn't have iPads, we didn't have Wi-Fi. So I think it's difficult now to claim that extra time on a train is wasted. In fact, I spoke to one businessman in Birmingham the other day who was worried his productivity was going to go down if the journey got any shorter because he would be too short to get anything done. A lot of critics from the economists also say the government hasn't really explained how this would help bridge the north-south divide, when there's quite a lot of modern economic analysis that says actually the reverse might be true. When you connect what you'd call the core and the periphery more tightly, actually it helps the core a lot more, because you've made it easier even for the southeast to attract talent and business from the north. And the really big one, I think, for economists is just that it's a lot of money. This is 30 or 35 billion pounds, whatever it ends up costing, which we could have spent on something else. £1,000 for every person who pays income tax. And even if it's right that the benefits outweigh the costs, that doesn't by itself mean we should go ahead and do it, because the Department of Transport, every other department in London, probably has a drawer full of ideas that would maybe deliver even more, might even deliver more benefits. The evidence suggests there's quite a lot that would deliver more benefits than this, even in transport.
OK, Stephanie, thank you for that. Well, let's talk to Patrick McLoughlin, the Transport Secretary. Good morning to you.
Morning, Evan.
Let's just start with some specifics from this NAO report. Firstly, that there's a funding hole, that you haven't actually yet allocated the money. I mean, is that just because you haven't got round to finding the budget and agreeing it with the Treasury yet, or is there a real hole?
There's not a real hole. The fact is that the government is committed to building HS2, as indeed was the previous government. Don't forget, this was a project we inherited from the last government. That government believed this was right for Britain. I believe it's right for Britain. There is no doubt of the huge growth in the use of railways across the country. Even in 2011, we saw 4,000 people standing on arrival to Euston, 5,000 people standing on arrival into Birmingham. Our railways have done a fantastic job. Since privatisation, the numbers have doubled of people using the railways. That is a massive opportunity, but we've also got to look at what other parts of the world are doing, and if we're going to compete with the rest of the world too, we're hugely investing in high-speed travel. We need to do that. This isn't just about high speed, though. This is also about capacity.
I want to go on to the big, just very quickly before we get on to the big case, because I want to just go through, if you like, the pernickety points, which obviously have to be dealt with, which was that on the cost benefit, there are also these errors that did seem to flatter the benefits very substantially. Now, those have all been removed, and we're pretty clear now, are we, that those errors are not in any way seeping into the cost benefit?
Look, HS2 is a huge project, and it is quite right that we're subject to regular scrutiny by the NAO and other bodies too. They are doing a snapshot on data that was published some time ago. The truth is, if you looked at the BCR for the
benefit
Jubilee line,
the
BCR to the Jubilee line to Stratford and Canary Wharf, it was 0.95. But if that hadn't been built, we would not have seen the development down there. And quite often the infrastructure that you put in brings even greater development to those areas. So it is important to look at the BCR, but it's also important to look at the overall economic case for this railway.
Well, I that gets me to where I wanted to get, actually, which is, in a way, your difficulty is this is just a big bet, isn't it, that you have to make? And in a sense, you're going to have to use some hunch. Is this something that shapes the country in a way that resources are going to slightly cluster around the big cities of the north of England? It is going to link those cities somewhat better to London. It'll change the psychology over rail journeys. These are arguments that you're just not going to be able to quantify, are they?
Well, I think you can quantify it. I think we are doing the BCR case, but you're quite right in a way. This is wider than just a BCR argument. If you go and talk to the cities in Leeds, in Manchester, in Birmingham, they will say how very important they think this is. And one of the things I've got to do as Transport Secretary is see how we can benefit other regions in and around those particular areas, so they all get a benefit from this. Other countries, we've got 65 miles of high-speed line in our country. When that was built, there was huge controversy around it. It wasn't something that people said, HS1's a great idea. There was controversy around that. 10 million people used that line last year.
But let me ask you this, picking up a point that Stephanie gave. Have you got in your department a file of things that deliver these benefit cost ratios bigger than 1.4, things that we are not currently planning to do? So is there this big list, this shopping list of things that would give us bigger benefits, probably at somewhat lower costs actually, but big benefits that we're just saying we haven't got the money to do, while we are going to do this, if you like, more marginal project that's going to cost tens of billions?
One can always find small projects which would make a big difference to a town or a particular area. There is nothing like a high-speed rail
right,
for
but
what
there
it
are
does.
projects. So Stephanie is right to say there are things that have bigger benefits, and that we're not doing them.
This is a project over 20 years.
Yeah.
This isn't a project for next year or the year after. There's a huge amount of planning.
But why have we got things
go.
that deliver big benefits, and we're simply not doing them?
But, well, we are doing them. We are. I mean, one of the things the Chancellor did last year in his autumn statement was to give extra money for road investments, and those are taking place. The local pinch point funds that can have an immediate impact. But also, as a government, you don't just plan for next year. You've got to plan how we compete in that global race. How do we show businesses to come to this country because you've got the right kind of transport connections, that you've got the right kind of communications? Transport has gone up the political agenda incredibly over the last 20 years since I was last in the Department of Transport as a junior minister. And we are looking to how Britain competes, not just now, but in that global race ahead of us.
Patrick McLoughlin, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
How can you measure the value of High Speed 2? Put a value on each passenger hour saved, estimate the number of journeys, multiply the number of hours up? Or do you make a big bet that it'll simply reshape the country for the better? Well, the National Audit Office thinks the case needs to be more clearly spelt out. The detailed numbers are weak, it thinks, and the bigger strategic argument needs to be made more clearly. So let's debate HS2 and also the way we should assess it with Emma Antrobus, Transport Manager at Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. Manchester, of course, being at one end of the great Y that HS2 will form. And also on the line, John Whitelegg, Professor of Sustainable Transport at Liverpool John Moores University. Morning to you both.
Good morning.
John Whitelegg, first of all, you're somewhat, I think, sceptical about HS2, but do you recognise that if it's a transformative piece of infrastructure, something that is not just sort of shaving an hour here or an hour there off a journey time, it's very difficult to quantify and give precise estimate to the benefits?
It's difficult in any transport infrastructure investment project to quantify the benefits, but what surprises me a great deal about the high-speed rail project is that there's a vast amount of evidence out there about what has happened in other countries and what has happened in road building when people have said this will create jobs, this will transform the economy, this will increase inward investment, this will, and so on and so on. And we know a great deal about what does happen, and what does not happen basically is the jobs are not created, jobs move around a bit, the centrality, importance of Paris or London or Tokyo is increased, and people don't pick up on real data and real evidence. So Nagoya in Japan, on the line between Tokyo and Osaka, lost 20% of its jobs after the opening of the Shinkansen high-speed line. So my worry about high-speed rail is there is a lot of evidence, a lot of information, a lot of things we can talk about properly in terms of evidence-based assessment, and the government's case simply ignores it all. It's not in any document.
Right. Emma Antrobus, that in a way, rather interesting, implies, if you take the Nagoya example, that actually it does sort of benefit London and it does sort of benefit Manchester at the two ends, but it doesn't benefit anyone in between.
Well, I think the issue really about high-speed rail is that actually it's about capacity. We currently have a West Coast main line that connects Manchester and London really quite effectively already, but there's no real growth left in that line. And so for things like our aspirations to grow rail freight, for instance, and take lorries off the roads, means that there's very little capacity there on the lines that people actually want to use. And what a new line will do is actually free up the capacity to allow some of those larger towns and other cities to have direct routes to places perhaps that they've been cut off from, certainly since the high frequency timetable went into play a few years ago.
John Whitelegg, I don't know whether that is something that's been factored into these benefit cost calculations, that you do free up a lot of lines, so services that at the moment watch big fast trains running from London to Manchester through them, towns watching those trains zip through their stations will actually maybe have much better services connecting them.
I think the problem with the capacity argument is that the lack of investigation of alternatives. If you look at how they manage transport in Frankfurt or Zurich or Copenhagen or other places around Europe, what you find is they free up capacity by reducing the number of trains on suburban and commuter lines, by introducing double-deck trains, for example, by sorting out signalling and in-cab, all sorts of technical stuff. So we can actually release a lot of capacity by using our existing capacity more efficiently. And the whole high-speed rail plan is based upon a rather big bang theory, you know, that we can solve every problem you can possibly list with a completely new railway line costing at the moment 34 billion, and that will sort everything out. But there are many alternatives that will release capacity and will help us to improve our transport system and improve the economy of every locality. Because what high-speed rail does not do, it doesn't. The scheme we have on offer, for example, will lead to lots of job losses in Warrington and Liverpool and other places, and it doesn't solve that. It damages economies.